Welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon, where the best ideas win. I'm your host, Josh Herring. Season 8 is all about the re-enchanting Inklings. How do we rebuild, renew, and restore culture? The Inklings give us a model. I want to ask for your help in two ways. You're probably watching this episode on X or on YouTube. Please find and follow us on both platforms. I tweet as at the Optimistic C3. And then if you're looking for the show on YouTube, just search for the Optimistic Curmudgeon. We want you to be able to find and follow our content and then be able to share that across your platforms. We want to be part of the conversation and help other people to see how life is truly good, true, and beautiful. And now, on to this week's episode of The Optimistic Curmudgeon. I'm your host, Josh Herring, and we're continuing our themed episodes in Season 8, The Re-Enchanting Inklings. My guest today is Christiana Hale. Christiana is the author of Deeper Heaven, a reader's guide to C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy, and she has an article in my new favorite book of Lewis essays, Life on the Silent Planet, Essays on Christian Living from C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy. Her essay is entitled Enjoyment and Contemplation, The Green Lady, Self-Knowledge, and Growth in Maturity. Christiana is a graduate of New St. Andrews College at both undergrad and graduate levels, if I tracked that correctly. Good. She also teaches for the Logo School. Christiana, welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited we get to chat today. I know we've been playing email tag, and I messed up scheduling a couple times, so I'm very grateful for your patience as we've been setting this up.
Yeah, no problem. It's, when you're in the education world, it is busy, right? There's always things coming up. So
it is. And I assume you, like every other teacher out there, are currently in the throes of getting towards the end of the school year. It's in sight, but it's not quite there. Tell us a little bit about what you're teaching currently before we get into your essay.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I actually teach at Logos School, which is a private classical Christian school, K through 12. I teach primarily the upper rhetoric school, Latin and literature, which is super fun. And I also teach part-time at New St. Andrews College, primarily teaching literature and writing electives, which is really fun. I actually just got done wrapping up a class on C.S. Lewis and medieval cosmology, which is my absolute favorite class to teach, of course. But yeah, it's kind of crazy that we're already hitting fourth quarter and looking to the end of the school year. It always goes really fast. So yeah, here we are.
At Thales College, we are looking at our first graduating class this coming April, and it feels like just yesterday that it was September, and we were welcoming our freshman class and thinking, wow, in just a couple semesters, our seniors are going to graduate. And now it's a couple semesters later, and we're there. If you were teaching medieval cosmology, I assume you were probably also walking students through something from Dr. Ward's Planet Narnia.
Yes, of course. Can't leave out Planet Narnia.
No, I'm actually currently teaching a class on called Great Text in Children's Literature, and we're spending about 4 weeks in the Chronicles of Narnia. I didn't realize how fast a pace this was until I tried to keep it, but we're doing one Chronicle of Narnia per class meeting on a Tuesday-Thursday cycle. And I love these books, but reading them in a single sitting is rather daunting, but it's been delightful to go back through those. And I have Ward in the back of my mind now. So I keep looking. I'm still not completely convinced of Lewis's intentionality in all of this. I'm sure this will come up to some of our conversations about the Ransom Trilogy, but there's definitely a lot of cosmological speculation and imagery happening all over the place.
Definitely. Yeah. I always wonder too, when it comes to Lewis, how much did he actually sit down and plan, right? And say, I'm going to do this, and how much was just very organic because of who he was and the mind he had and all of the influence that everything he loved worked on him, right? He's the sort of writer that everything he brings in ends up working its way out into his own writing. So I don't know. The more I read Ward, though, and the more that I read the Narnia books, I've become more and more convinced that he must have meant more of it than we maybe think, because it's just so saturated. But maybe we'll never know for sure.
That's a question for the other side of eternity for sure.
Yes.
If I'm still operating on the assumption that the Great Divorce is not literal, and we're not going to have
Mhm.
Lewis meeting us at the edge of a desert to see if we really want to go to heaven or not. But that might be a question for them. But I will tell you that this time through, I am much, or at least I'm convinced that Lewis is sort of the first three novels feel very occasional to me, and almost like he's not quite sure if this is going to keep going. But it's when we hit, particularly the silver chair, that it seemed to me like, oh, this is the first time I noticed Lewis attaching that book to a coming book. He has a reference
Mhm.
in the silver chair to Corin Thunderfist, which makes me think,
Yeah.
he maybe he added this, or he knew already that was coming. He seemed to
Mhm.
already be pretty sure by that point this series is going to keep going, and there's going to be 7, and these are some major plot points to tie together. Because from the silver chair onward, it seems like it's a much more conscious effort, I think.
Mhm.
But I have nothing more to support that than just the meanderings as I read. Well, let's get to it then. I'd love to. Could you start us off with kind of your story of encountering Lewis, and what really prompted you to decide that we really needed a reader's guide to the Ransom trilogy?
Yeah, I encountered Lewis, as I think many people do, as a kid with Narnia. I remember, some early memories are of my mom reading Narnia books to us before bed, and so many years of just loving Narnia before really. It wasn't until high school that I realized, oh, there's a lot more to Lewis than Narnia. In fact, Narnia is kind of was a and so I think I read a couple of his other books, like Mere Christianity, and maybe Screw Tape. And I know I read Till We Have Faces in high school and was completely blown away by that book, and didn't understand half of it at the time.
Mhm.
It was a really formative experience in terms of my love of Lewis, because I was like, this book is amazing. I want to be in a position where I can understand more of what Lewis is doing here. And so just growing up with you, kind of a smattering here and there of interactions. And then what's funny to me is that I did try to read the Ransom trilogy when I was probably, 14 or 15. And I did not get into it at all. As I think probably most typical 14, 15-year-olds
Sure.
would probably have that experience. I thought, oh, it'll just be like Narnia 2.0 sort of thing. And
Mhm.
it didn't fulfill my expectations. And I honestly, I think I made it like 2 chapters in and then just gave up. I was like, I'm not usually a book quitter. At least I wasn't at that time, but I couldn't make it into it. And so then fast forward a while into college, I was doing my undergraduate degree, and I took a freshman rhetoric class. And funnily enough, the rhetoric teacher assigned the Ransom trilogy. He really, really loved the Ransom trilogy. And I think he kind of assigned it whenever he could get away with it, like whatever class. And so, there could be an argument made for it fitting into a rhetoric course, perhaps a little tenuous, but he assigned it,
You
and I
can fit Lewis
remember,
into almost anything if you really are,
yeah,
if you're really committed. I mean,
that's
he can,
true.
there's always a hook to everything.
True. It's like, I mean, Ransom is a philologist, right? Philologist, words, rhetoric. There we go. It just
For
ties
sure.
together. So, but it was really funny, as I do remember having a conscious thought. There was a sort of dismay at the fact that it was assigned, because all I remembered was the fact I couldn't really get into it when I was a teenager. And so, but now it's for a class, so I have to read it. It's a grade, right? And so I have to get through it. And I just fell in love with it. And I think, it's rare that you can point to a specific moment in your life and say that changed my life
Mm.
entirely. But I think I can safely say without a doubt that that teacher assigning that book in that class really changed everything. So, because he really was fascinated with Ward's thesis as well, and the medieval
Mhm.
cosmology. And so when he taught through it, he brought all of that in. And I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. I was really captivated by it. And it was actually that moment in freshman year that I decided I need to write my senior thesis about the Ransom trilogy, because it's that cool. I want to learn more about it. So I ended up writing my senior thesis, undergrad thesis, on the Ransom trilogy. It was a little bit more of an argumentative thesis, a little narrow, focusing on Dante and Lewis. Actually, Lewis is really drawing from the Divine Comedy in his structuring of the trilogy. And in the course of that research for that thesis, I was at the time, this is 10 years ago now. Wow, I'm feeling old. It was a long time ago. And at the time, there was actually not as much available in terms of secondary research on the Ransom Trilogy. There were some good things here and there, a lot of things within other books. So just guides to Lewis, there would be a little snippet on the Ransom Trilogy. And obviously there was Ward's book. But that is even more Narnia focused than Ransom Trilogy focused. And so I was finding it difficult to find a lot of research. And secondly, I was getting a lot of pushback from friends and family back home whenever I brought up my topic saying I'm doing it on the Ransom Trilogy. They'd be like, really? That's just such a weird book. It's so weird, especially the third one, right? With Merlin and Mr. Bultitude, and what is going on? And it's just weird. And I found myself constantly wishing that I had something that I could point them to and say, here, go read this. I think this will help you understand why I think it's such an important book and give you some more insight into what I think Lewis was actually doing, some of the influences there. Why is the medieval cosmology so important to him? And I was finding myself not really having anything that I could just point them to. And especially things that maybe weren't quite as high academic, that would be a little bit beyond the pay grade of a homeschooling mom or a senior in high school or something like that. And so when I went to grad school afterwards, I was thinking ahead to my grad project, and I thought, well, why don't I just write what I wish there was? I mean, I've already done a lot of research. I've pretty much read everything I could get my hands on that existed about this. So I'll just write it myself. So the rough draft of Deeper Heaven, what became Deeper Heaven, was actually my graduate thesis project. And then the rest is kind of history, lots of edits, lots of reworking. And even now, as I look back at it, I'm like, oh, there's things I would want to add, constantly things I'm discovering. But it really is just the kind of the tip of the iceberg, I feel that, and since it was published in 2021, there have been a number of other books have come out on the Ransom Trilogy, which is really exciting to see it just getting more attention and the attention it deserves. I think well-deserved attention, especially the third book. To be honest, it's so prophetic in many ways and applicable. So yeah, that's kind of the background of my relationship with Lewis, and then of course how Deeper Heaven came to be.
Oh, that's fantastic. Two quick shout outs that I thought of as you were telling that story. I was at the Ciceronian Society conference last week, and a friend of mine, Annie Crawford, read a wonderful paper about that hideous strength. And we got to Q&A afterwards, and another friend of mine, Paul Mueller, just got this smirk on his face, and he sticks his hand up and he asks, "So what about Merlin?" That's it. Just what about Merlin? That's the one. And,
about Merlin.
And Annie did a phenomenal job, like speaking to the significance of it. But I just think it's so funny that is, I think, the piece that sticks with a lot of people. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Mr. Bultitude. He's my favorite character in that hideous strength. I did also want to give a quick shout out to David Bates and the current season of Pints with Jack. They're working through Perelandra chapter by chapter. Of course, we're recording in spring now, definitely spring here in North Carolina, spring of 2025. And that's their current season. But he, in the most recent episode, he was talking about his theory that if I understood your argument in Deeper Heaven, I don't think you fully would agree with. But he thinks there's a 3-chapter sequence towards the end as Ransom is going on sort of the Catabasis down through the bowels of Perelandra. The chapter where he is particularly struggling with the unman is Hell. And then there's sort of him being nursed back to health at the bosom of Perelandra herself. That's Purgatorio. And then Paradiso is the ascent with Tor and Tenedril on this mountain that they didn't previously know existed. And I never really thought about those 3 chapters in that framework. And I don't know. I'm sure it would fall apart if you pressed for too many Dantean allusions. It seemed old to some degree.
Yeah. No, and I think I would totally buy it. And it's just, and I don't think it would undermine my hypothesis that the 3 books sort of map on also,
Mm-hmm.
to have, I mean, because Lewis likes to do this, and it's a very medieval thing to do, right? Circles within circles, right? It's like the
All
layers
the
within layers,
correspondences, they're all there.
right? Everything, right? It is both inner and outer. It's rings within rings, right? I mean, that whole last chapter of Perelandra really is this explosion of, I mean, Dantean
Mm-hmm.
ecstasy, basically, right? And I think it definitely maps very closely onto Paradiso and what happens at the end of
Mm-hmm.
Paradiso as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Lewis has that in mind too. I mean, the mountain that he goes, under and then climbs up. I make a reference to it as you're feeling very much like Purgatory, Mount Purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
So and there's other connections. So I think that he could be doing both
Yeah.
and, right, is the answer.
Very much so.
For sure.
Very much so. You definitely, by your time you're reading about the great dance and Blessed Be He, it's not hard to hear the love which moved the sun and other stars just behind that.
Yes.
Well, let's go to the your more recent writing. So you spend a lot of time on the ideas of enjoyment and contemplation. What is Lewis doing with enjoyment and contemplation in Perelandra?
So I think that these 2 ideas are really important to Lewis. And he wrote an essay just on enjoyment and contemplation. And the way that he, describes them as only Lewis really can, it's really fascinating to then see those categories showing up all over the place in his other writings. And I think that he doesn't reference them always explicitly, but most explicitly comes out in Perelandra, I believe, because in the essay, it's called Meditations in a Tool Shed. He uses this analogy of looking along the beam versus looking at the beam. So he uses the image of being in a dark tool shed, and there's this kind of crack in the slats of the shed that lets a beam of light through. And there's these 2 ways of interacting with that beam of light. You could either stand in the dark and look at it, in which case you'll see the dust motes floating in it. You'll see kind of its width and its breadth and all that. Or you could step into it and look along it, in which case you're seeing look along the beam and see actually outside the tool shed. You might see, I think he says, the trees and waving their branches in the wind, or the sun or the sky or clouds, or you'll actually see by means of the beam of light. So the beam of light enables you to see other things. And he kind of maps those two ways of experiencing reality, those 2 ways of knowing, to enjoyment and contemplation. So contemplation is the looking at the beam, right? There's a very kind of, you're assessing something, you're quantifying it. It's a little bit more logical, rational, perhaps. You're dissecting, you're analyzing. And the enjoyment is when you're not really thinking about what you're doing at all. You're in, to use a modern phrase, in the moment, right? You're just experiencing something in a way that is not didactic or analytical. And so it's a really interesting way of parsing it out. And he acknowledges that a lot of times we are almost doing both simultaneously, or rapidly kind of oscillating between the 2. And so it can be hard to identify when we're doing one versus the other. But he does acknowledge that as soon as you are thinking about yourself thinking about it, or thinking about yourself experiencing something, you have stepped outside of enjoyment, and you're suddenly contemplating again. And I think this connects really interestingly to his idea of joy in Surprised by Joy as well, right? What that he talks about his experience of joy also, that as soon as he realizes that he's feeling a certain way, the feeling has slipped out of his grasp, right? As soon as you see yourself doing it, it's gone, and that moment has passed, and you can't really chase after it again.
I thought you had an analogy in that section where you certainly captured my experience in writing, and you read to me like somebody who has had this experience yourself of just feeling like these thoughts are like passing through you almost, and they're coming out in words, and it's in that moment, it's not about let me check the comma rules. Let me pull out the Turabian manual and remember the exact way I'm supposed to set this up. It's just about the pure enjoyment of feeling like this essay, this writing, this poem, this play, this book chapter, whatever, is just kind of being born like Athena, like out of the head almost, except like
Yes.
typing. And but that's I was thinking a counter, and maybe another analogy or another example might be the difference between that. I've had a lot of book reviews where I just wake up one morning thinking, "Oh, now I see what I hate about that book, and I have to go write it like right now." And but that's so different than like the process of writing a dissertation. Where you're like, okay, I know there are these like 8 things that must happen in this chapter, and I have done 4 of them. So today I'm going to try to do 5 and 6. And it does. It's not that it's bad, but it's not nearly as much fun to write in that way.
Definitely. Yeah. And there's a time for both of them, right? Both of them happen. And sometimes, as you've experienced, if you're again a writer, you can go very quickly slip next, right? You're kind of inspired and you're writing and you're just not even thinking really about it. And then suddenly something happens to trip you up. Like, oh, I don't know where I'm going now. And you have to stop and actually analyze what you've done and where you want to go. And so those two things, again, come hand in hand, right? You have one and then the other, and you don't always know where one ends and the other begins. But where Lewis really, I think, explicitly utilizes these categories is in Perelandra. And what really keys us in is to that phrase again, looking along the beam. He uses the phrase looking alongside or walking alongside. He has the Green Lady talking about that. And so that caught my attention in terms of comparing and contrasting it to his talking of enjoyment and contemplation in that essay. And how does he utilize those same two categories in Perelandra? And I think what's really interesting, and I talk about this in my essay, obviously, is how he's actually applying it to the specific knowledge of oneself. So when it comes to the Green Lady, in her experience, the whole idea of contemplation is actually foreign to her, right? The idea of stepping outside of the moment, if you will, and looking at something, or even and looking at oneself as if you were not yourself, she says, right? That's a very strange idea to her, which to us, we're born doing this, right? We're always, our sin nature, we always are looking at ourselves doing things or self-analyzing or whatever it is. That's kind of the air we breathe. And so the idea to her, though, is a completely foreign one, that we would actually step outside and see ourselves doing something, or even applied. I think she applies it also to the future, right? Looking at something that hasn't happened yet. Why would we even do that, right? That's again a completely foreign idea to her. And so I found that just a really interesting topic to explore a little bit further, and then how that ties into the unman's temptation of her later. He actually plays on that idea as well when he's trying to get her to be disobedient. And so it's really interesting topic. Obviously, I don't want to just like say my whole essay, but
right. But it is, and there's so much happening in Perelandra. I mean, you could pick up one thread and do a whole essay or a whole book just on that one thread, and you will by no means have exhausted Perelandra. Before we go to the unmanned, I do just want to note, you just gave us a great illustration of really one key to how to read Lewis. If I can put on a slight hermeneutics hat for a moment, like I think I don't remember who first pointed this out to me, but this is not unique to me, but I think most people who read a lot of Lewis start to notice this. Lewis tends to use vocabulary very particularly, and then he'll use that vocabulary across a bunch of different writings. You mentioned joy earlier. That's a big word for him. He goes into a lot of definitional layers of joy in Surprised by Joy, but in a lot of essays, he'll just use joy, and that's what's in the background. And he's sort of either expecting us, the readers, to know that, or leaving it as kind of a puzzle. So I think it's just really interesting that you did that with the word alongside, because I hadn't noticed that. I had made that connection. And that's one of the reasons I love talking to other Lewis readers, because like everybody keys in on certain words and certain ideas. And then that Owen Barfield line that everything Lewis thought is in everything Lewis wrote kind of kicks in.
Very true.
Yeah, well, we definitely need to get to the unmanned because I think the unmanned's work with the Green Lady I personally find fascinating
Mhm.
because in this moment we have an uncorrupted Eve figure, and she clearly is. At first, when Ransom meets her, he's sort of she thinks that he's like the king of his world, but then there's that great moment when she's like, "Oh no, this is not a king. This is a son." And this is some sort of weird, I don't really understand it, but fallen son. And she suddenly, her demeanor changes because she's not speaking to an equal anymore. And it's not prideful in her to do that. But there's a greatness and a grandeur to her that's there naturally.
Mhm.
And it seems like the unman is trying to attack that naturalness of her. And I loved how you kind of framed this as the unman trying to undermine the lady's sense of her own identity. But
Mhm.
walk us through kind of what's going on there with her identity and sort of the temptation to appeal to
Mhm.
something else.
Yeah, well, I think the first fundamental aspect of his attack is the idea that he's even introducing an identity to her. So she
Mm,
is such a character. I mean, it's fascinating how Lewis writes her character, but she exists in such a way as she doesn't even have a category for her own identity, right? She's not thinking of herself at all, really, in any way. And to a certain extent, Ransom's the one to introduce that idea to her, and she at first considers it to be wise, or at least she thinks it is, right? I love that line where she's like, this wisdom, if it is indeed wisdom, right? She kind of has a little aside of, I'm still holding out judgment on whether this is a smart idea or not. The idea of having an identity that you can look at, right? It almost feels like separating out something from yourself and treating
mm,
it as separate. This is my identity. Well, what even is that really, right? What are we talking about? And so that's the first step, is the idea of an identity at all. And then secondly, the idea that her identity up to this point has been primarily found in relationship to everything around her, right? It's in
mhm,
relationship to Mal Deal, it's in relationship to her husband, to the animals. Right? She knows as much as she can. It's more of, again, an experiential knowledge where her place is in the entire structure of the cosmos, right? She knows
mhm,
exactly where she is. And what the unman, I think, part of what he's trying to do is to say, no, 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 there's an aspect of your identity, this untapped potential that is yours and yours alone, right? It has nothing to do with anything else, right? It's this thing, this job that you have to do, this role that you have to play that is of supreme importance. And what's important is that you choose it, right? You have to do it. Mal Deal, the whole test is, can you choose it while doing what he has said not to do, right? It's a really twisted logic,
mhm.
actually, as we all are watching it and saying, no, 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 don't don't do it, don't you
Don't
see
fall for it.
and Ransom's doing the same thing, right? He's like,
Right.
no, but it's really struggling to match the unman's logic, right?
Mm.
Because the unman is very good at what he does, right? He uses
Oh.
rhetoric very well, and he's mixing just enough truth in there that it's really throwing Ransom for a loop, right? He's like, it's kind of true, but it's also really, really not. So I
Mm,
think that's the primary attack, really, is the idea of identity at all, and
mhm,
taking a step out of oneself to look at it. And then the idea that your identity can be found as a sort of its own entity that's disconnected
mhm.
from any other bit of reality, right? It's its own thing, which is, again, not true, and is the thing that is going to ultimately would stumble, I think,
Mhm.
to Nidril if it had worked.
And what I found really fascinating is how you connected that idea of what the temptation is to this movement, sort of a double movement from enjoyment to contemplation. Because there is a
Mhm,
sense in which Ransom, just by being there, as the lady says, he is making her older. And that's
mhm,
not inherently a bad thing. It's not a bad thing necessarily to move from enjoyment to contemplation. I think of this in terms of when I was a kid, I was a voracious reader. Good, bad, mediocre, garbage, excellent. I didn't care. I was that kid who would roam through the local public library. I didn't care if it was the adult, the children, the young adult. It was like if it caught my eye, I was taking it home. as I got older and I had more teachers who gave me more tools, I've lost some of that natural enjoyment. Like, it takes a lot more for me just to get sucked into a book, in part because I'm prone to a lot more contemplative analysis
Mhm.
of really anything that I read these days. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different. And I think that's the
Mhm.
movement that Ransom introduces to her. It is a kind of maturing, but it raises this specter that the unman then says, oh, well, now that you're contemplating, you should contemplate yourself and should contemplate your duty. You had this great line. It's from page 93 of the Davenant book. The unman subtly and cleverly seeks to redefine what it means to be an obedient woman. I thought that captured a really deep principle of initially, obedience is no struggle, it's no trial for her. She
Mhm.
enjoys obedience. And part of what the young man is trying to shift is to get her to see that, oh no, wait a minute. What if I were to obey in a different way, a courageous
Mhm.
way, a way that sacrificed and made me so noble? And then Ransom has that horrific moment where he looks at her, and this beautiful woman who is so unconscious of her beauty not only looks like a woman of his own world, but like a badly made up tragedy queen in his own world, while still having her own greatness. But it's starting to be clouded just a bit. I just
Mhm.
thought that was
Yeah.
that redefinition is such a crucial part of what the unman is trying to do.
Yeah. He's like, let's, you need to be obedient in a rebellious way, which is, again, when you say it that way, you're like, wait a second, this makes no sense. How can I be disobediently obedient? But he somehow starts to make it sound really logical, right?
Oh,
Because he uses all the argumentation of this is what Mal really wants you to be, though, is your own woman, right? Your own person who forges her own path. And so he set this whole thing up as a test to see if you will really, and he keeps working on it, working
mhm.
on it. And what's really fascinating too, I don't think I necessarily say make this point, but the fact that he uses one of the most effective means is he's using these stories
Mhm.
to affect her, right? He's telling all these stories, and Ransom starts to realize, oh, these are all about women, sometimes very horrible women, actually
Mhm.
doing things, standing up against the mob, right?
I'm pretty sure
And
there's a reference to Lady Macbeth in that passage where it's just like
yes,
the unsex me now so that I might courageously murder for my husband kind of spirit is
yes,
what the devil is literally
exactly.
saying, is praising in that moment.
Yeah, and he's using narrative, really a
Mhm.
narrative, poetic storytelling to make it seem really, really attractive. And it even takes Ransom a moment to realize, oh wait, I'm recognizing some of these stories, but he's not telling them the right way. He's not presenting them accurately. But it's those stories, right, that suddenly are working on her imagination, and
Mhm.
she's suddenly, again, that crack in the door that Ransom opened is now enabling her to imagine herself fulfilling some other role, right? She's stepping out into the alongside. It's not in the moment. She's imagining something
Yep.
and imagining herself in this other role. And that's the moment where Ransom's really just like, this can't keep going, right? He sees that it's starting
Right.
to starting to get a foothold.
And this is going beyond where this article goes, of course. But then I just love that moment where Ransom first sort of prays, like, God, can't you send somebody? And then he just has this palpable sense that he's the one who's been sent. And then he realizes that he has at least two realizations. The one of them might be a little bit later in the story, but he eventually realizes the devil is, in one sense, just smarter than he is because he is so much older. And he is, I mean, it's a true thing that um uh Lucifer, the morning star, is older and in some senses greater and bigger than any human. That much is true.
Mm,
But then so Ransom just kind of realized he's not going to win this on the grounds of reason and logic and discourse. And I
mm.
just I sort of I don't know if this is true. This too, I'm waiting to heaven to get to find out. But I think of Lewis as sort of a dogged little debater who is perfectly willing to fight dirty in a debate if he thinks he needs to. And in that moment, that's what he writes. He has Ransom literally like, what's the line? Name of the Father, the Son, of the Holy Ghost. Here goes, and he
I mean,
launches his
amen.
boxing match. Like,
Yeah. Well, and the moment he realizes also that he has to sleep, right? So he's also physically, because apparently he's like, the unman isn't sleeping. He's just he keeps going, and I need sleep at some point. And so he just realizes he's going to get outlasted at some point, and that it just, like I says, it can't go on.
Well, listeners and viewers, if you're hearing how much we both love this book, hopefully you're taking the message home that you too need to read Perelandra if you haven't read it. And if you have, today's a great day to reread it. Christiana, let's turn to Deeper Heaven for a second. I want to read a decent sized passage from page 281, actually. I really loved what you articulated about myth and Lewis's vision of myth. I thought this just came out very clearly in literally the last page. So I want to read this and then ask you my question. Lewis's project is at the same time simpler and more complex than rejecting the knowledge that our technological advancements have enabled us to gain. He wants us to recover this discarded image, but to restore truths. He wants to recover this discarded image, not to supplant the current factual framework, but to restore truths which erroneous ideologies have stripped from that framework. In the Ransom Trilogy, he undertakes an imaginative reconstruction project to restore wonder and awe. That was a beautiful articulation of what Lewis is doing there. Could you walk us through Lewis's understanding of myth? Where does the medieval cosmology kind of fit in there? And how does that help us simultaneously not reject Newtonian physics and the Copernican model of the solar system while holding on to this older sense, this higher sense of truth?
Yeah. So I think that ultimately, I mean, to kind of walk it back a little bit, it connects to the idea that's an old idea, very medieval idea, that ultimately poetry or poesy, if you want to use the older term, story, myth, it's actually a way of knowing, right? Knowledge, meaning is actually metaphor. We can't escape it. We have to use it. That's how we interact with the world, is always through a medium, right? So even the words that we are speaking right now, the words, they're symbols that we have assigned meaning to, right? And that's how we communicate with each other. And then you take it to the next level, and we are constantly using images and analogies and metaphors and stories to communicate meaning to each other. And so Lewis would argue that myth is inescapable, right? Myth is, in a sense, it's a world picture, right? It's a story of the world and of our place in the world, how we came to be here, where we're going, what we should be doing in between. And everyone has one, right? And ultimately, Christianity is the true myth. It's the true story. It's the true explanation. But it has still all of the qualities that we associate with myth. And so I think that's a really important distinction, because we oftentimes as moderns use the word myth to almost equate falsehood, right? Oh, that's just a myth, meaning it's just a false story or a false explanation. But Lewis expands that definition to something more than that, right? There is such a thing in his categorization as a true myth, because myth is not just a false narrative like we've come to associate it with. It's actually a way of understanding reality, a way of understanding the world. And so when it comes to the medieval cosmology, Lewis is seeing so much mythological importance in the structure, and that's separate, or can be separated from, the physical structure of the cosmos. So we've obviously made more progress in terms of our scientific observations. We know that things don't actually physically work the way that the medievals thought they did. But there are so many mythological elements that we have stripped away. So we've exchanged one myth for another. And what's happened in that exchange is that we've actually gained factual truth, but we've lost the truth of the story, right? So we've exchanged one myth for another. We've embraced the evolutionary myth. He even has a great poem called Evolutionary Hymn, which is a really, really fun one. But we've exchanged it for the evolutionary myth, which is a really boring myth, actually. It's really not very interesting. Oh, things exploded and now we're all here. Yay, that's really exciting. And we've lost a lot of or we've exchanged it for the materialistic myth, right? That all we are is atoms and bouncing around, and that's it. And so we've lost the story, right? We've lost that element. And those are the things, the symbols, the metaphors, the meaning. And we always use a metaphor. We have to explain it somehow. So, if someone explains gravity to you, what is gravity? They describe it. Well, it's the law of gravity. Things fall to the ground because it's a law. And Dante would say, well, no, they fall to the ground because of love, right? Because they have to, right? They're moving to the center, right? They're drawn there because of love, and because of the love that moves the sun and other stars, right? It's like, that's why they're falling. Well, how would it look if they were falling because of love versus falling because of a law? Well, it would look exactly the same, right? If I drop a pencil, did it fall because of love or because of a law? Well, we don't know by just looking, right? So science describes, it doesn't really explain. It can tell us what it sees. It can says, if you do this, this will happen because we have observed that every time you do this, this happens. And we have hypotheses as to why it happens. And sometimes we can confirm those, but ultimately, you can ask why infinitely. And at some point you're going to reach a bottom where the answer is, well, because it does. Right? And beyond that, if you want to answer, well, why does it do that? That's when you have to introduce myth. Right? There's a story. When you reach your axiomatic, the axiomatic bottom, it's an explanation of everything that is going to reveal what myth you are founding everything on, right? Ultimately, is it an explosion? Is it evolution, or is it the creation? Again, we call it creation myth, creation story, right? But it has to go back to something that's outside of, well, it's just because it does it. It does it because it does, right? And so I might be wandering a little away from your initial question, but
no, this is great.
Ultimately, what Lewis loves about medieval cosmology are those mythological elements, the elements that actually are bringing back an important part of our myth that we have lost, especially in our modern materialistic age.
Well, I think there's so many pieces I want to tag into there, but I'm going to confine myself to a couple. When we think about myth, I think it's helpful to keep in mind that when we are looking at the totality of human experience, every human culture has stories. And a few of those stories seem to last through the ages. And that too, I think, is what Lewis has in mind with the idea of myth. He's not thinking about just the story of the Hopi Indians per se. That story somehow didn't really transcend beyond a particular culture. But there are some myths that do seem to speak to the totality of the human experience, and they resonate. Then back to that enjoyment side, way before there's a contemplative engagement with the myths. And I think they do that because we as humans are deeply convinced in our souls that there is meaning in the world. And myth agrees with that. And myth tells us, yes, this world is meaningful. It's not just what you see. The storm is actually this whole cosmic drama that is conveying the sense of these different forces that are beyond our normal perception. But I think I find it really interesting that Lewis is not alone in recognizing this as a huge, huge problem right at the middle of the 20th century. Now, I know the American conservative tradition a lot more than I know the British conservative tradition. But I think Lewis is writing imaginatively and occasionally in prose about the exact same problems that Richard Weaver, Russell Kirk, and another Brit, Christopher Dawson, all identify in their different spheres. They all write about this world, this modernity that seems to be stripped of meaning. And Weaver has my favorite argument about this. He's looking around. If you can believe this argument is as old as 1948, and Ideas Have Consequences, he makes this argument that so many people are looking for meaning and they can't find it, that the psychology business is booming. And he thinks that the boom of psychology in the 1940s after World War II is actually tied to a lack of psychic resources to deal with trauma. It's not just that we've gone through this huge traumatic war experience. It's that we've hollowed out our own ability to deal with and to face that trauma because we've demythologized the world. And now, I think Weaver and Lewis would agree on that much. They would disagree on a lot of other things, but they would probably agree on that part. It seems to me that we need, if it's true that myth is this way of accessing meaning, a myth is really tied to social cohesion. But for that to be a positive and healthy cohesion, the myth has to be true. And it has to ground us in who we are as human beings, which I think that's the part that I love about forget which book this was. This was in either your essay or in your book, but you talked about out Lewis as he's wrestling with the facticity of the medieval cosmos. He recognized that it's really the incarnation that puts Earth at the center. Whether Earth is physically at the center or not, this is the place where God became man and redeemed his fallen creation. And that makes us the center, which Lewis, of course, brings out in the last chapter of Perelandra. But he talks about like there being multiple centers, but this is one of the centers. And that too gives us a reason to see this world as deeply, deeply meaningful.
Yeah.
I think all of us is also, Lewis is getting so much of this from Spencer. And he talks about this. I think this is part of what he has in mind with the line that you should read Spencer for your mental health, which I think is really funny. I really want to meet someday. If anybody listening is in the psychology therapeutic world, please test this out and let me know how it goes. I would love to hear somebody actually try this. Okay, these sound like some really serious problems. You need to read 10 pages of Edmund Spencer a day. And like, let me know.
How it goes.
It'd be great.
Yes. Well, I think it's Lewis too. I don't remember. It's probably in maybe Mere Christianity. I don't remember exactly where, but he says, if the world had no meaning, we ought never to have discovered that it had no meaning. Right. Because if again, it's that reductio ad absurdum that, if you state, yes, the world has no meaning, well, then by definition, that statement has no meaning. So how do we know what you mean? Right. So it's that kind of devolvement into absurdity that argument has. But I think, again, what Lewis goes back to again and again is the idea that story, narrative, myth, it is a means to knowing, right? So it's a way that we as human beings, which I think makes sense. We're created in the image of God, and God is a storytelling God, right? He's telling the best story, and he's telling it in such a way that we're living it, right? His stories are alive. They come to life. And whenever an author, and I think Lewis is very, very adept at this, whenever an author writes a book in such a way that you say, I felt like I was there, I felt like I was experiencing it, or the characters came to life, right? I would know them if I met them in person. They are very, very dimly reflecting that image of God in that storytelling. And obviously the best storytellers also help us to understand more about God's story through their own storytelling, because they're reflecting their maker in that way. And I think that's ultimately what Lewis means is by true myth this is the backbone of our entire existence, right? God's story that he's telling it in such a way that he has favorite themes, he has favorite tropes, he has favorite archetypes that he uses again and again, and they're kind of woven into the very fabric of reality. And so it makes sense that every culture will have these myths where those same things show up, and you wonder why. It's like, well, because that's the way God made the world. He made it in such a way that those themes, those ideas, those archetypes keep showing up over and over and over again.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Well, we are coming towards our conclusion of this conversation, and we actually have a lovely size live stream audience. We've got Daniel Fukushan commented, "What a great conversation!" Thanks for that, Daniel. Do a quick word to our current audience. If any of you have comments or questions, if we've got time, I'll try to take those, but that depends in part on where our last question goes. But again, if we have time, we'd love to get those into the conversation. So whichever platform you're watching this on, please do add in a comment or question. Christiana, I wanted to spend a second on one of my major interests in Perelandra is Lewis's focus on gender. And I try to resist every everybody who's written a dissertation goes through that stage where you sort of see your dissertation hiding under every rock and you want to make everything about your topic. So I promise I'm not trying to do that, but you kind of brought it up with a chapter called True Femininity. And you had a shout out to my favorite Christian pagan childless matron, Mother Dimble. Could you talk to us for a moment about what true femininity is and how do we see sort of a joyful submission in Mother Dimble?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I know it's probably it's a very contentious one in these times. But I think what I brought up earlier about Tinidral and her identity, right? We kind of talked about that earlier. And her identity as being found in relation to others, right? And the unman's temptation is in trying to get her to see it as something separate, something untethered from reality and from everyone around her, from her God, from her husband, from everything else. I think that is really connected to the identity of women, right? And what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a biblical woman. And I think it connects to Mother Dimble as well. It's this idea of knowing who we are. But when we say, knowing who we actually mean, well, it means who are we in relation to God and to our fellow human beings and the creation around us, and where is our place in that, right? In the great chain of being, where are we? And so I think that's where that comes into play. And you mentioned joyful submission, and ultimately, that's kind of come to be, I think, considered a dirty word, right? Submission, mainly because of Paul's words to wives submitting to their husbands. And I think what's important to note is that we are all called to submission. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, every human being, right? We are supposed to be submissive to God, to people in leadership over us in different realms, right? It looks different for different people in different realms and in different roles. But we shouldn't shy away from that role, right? The word submission is to literally send under. So we are sending our own desires, our own wants, our own dreams, our own goals. We are putting them underneath something else. They are not as important as something else. And that something else, biblically, ultimately at the top is God's will, God's word, right? What he tells us to do and to be, right? We all are called as Christians to submit ourselves to the word of God. And then in varying roles, kind of trickling down from that, right? If we are submitting to God's word, that means submitting to it in every aspect. And so if God says, wives, submit to your husbands, we shouldn't shy away from doing that. What that looks like, I think a lot of people there's so much debate over, and that's a whole nother can of worms that don't want to get into. But we have to start by recognizing that if God's word, if there was a verse that said you should wear yellow socks on Fridays, as Christians, we would be like, well, Amazon, order 5 pairs of yellow socks or whatever, 10 pairs, however many pairs we need, right? We'd be like, yes, we're submitting to the word of God. And so if he said, obviously I'm using a very silly example, sure, but the point being that as Christians, we know that if we see God's word as saying something, we need to be obedient to it and striving to the best of our ability. We're working through what does that mean. And so as women, submission is not a unique aspect of being a woman. It's an aspect of being human. The question being is, what realms are we meant to submit in and in what relationships? And as a side note, it says wives submit to your husbands, not women submit to all men. That's a totally different thing that it doesn't say to do. So just as a little side note. Side note. Which is important. But I think I love Mother Dimble as a character because Lewis displays this so clearly. I mean, she's barren, she's childless, and yet she is one of the most fruitful women characters in that book. And it's a wonderful way of Lewis showing that fruitfulness is not restricted to childbearing, right? And I think it's a great picture of, I think it might be in Isaiah somewhere, right? Is saying the children of the barren woman will be greater than the married woman, right? Something like that. And Mother Dimble, I mean, her name even is Mother Dimble, right? She's not actually a mother, but she is. She was a mother to everyone that she met, really. And she reminds me of Sarah Smith in in The Great Divorce also, right? The woman who also was a mother to everyone she ever met, all the boys and girls that would come to her for advice, and she'd help them. And so it's this idea that femininity ultimately to Lewis is fruitfulness, right? It is, but it's not a narrow kind of fruitfulness. It's a fruitfulness that encompasses so many different aspects of life. And it's, I mean, even in the context of Mother Dimble's relationship to Jane, how she nurtures and grows and encourages Jane in the course of their relationship, that itself is a sort of fruitfulness in the way that her interactions with any other person encourages them to a more faithful obedience and a more faithful walk. And that's, I mean, I think everyone should want to be like Mother Dimble ultimately, really.
I feel that way with most Lewis books. Like the positive characters, and like everybody ought to want to be like these characters in so many ways. But I think that's a really helpful word on submission, and a reminder that both everyone's in a submissive relationship to someone else in some domain of human life, and ultimately all of us must submit to God. I'm reminded of Lewis's essay, "Priestesses in the Church," where he makes that argument pretty clearly. And that the pastoral role is one that's supposed to represent God to the church, and it's not. He has this great. It is no solution to one being a bad man to replace him with one who is not a man at all. But just like, and that Lewis has this sense of representation that's supposed to happen there, and the marriage is itself supposed to represent that same dynamic and be a living image of that dynamic. And of course, everybody loves to focus on, oh no, how terrible, wives submit to your husbands. There's such less scholarship on, or so many less outrage on the line. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, which means literally
because that's so much easier.
It's like
so much easier to lay down your lives for your wives, right?
Right. No, but I think it's also worth just hopefully tying this all together, that like that vision of Mother Dimble as joyfully submitted to her husband and to Ransom as Pendragon of the community at St. Anne's, which of course Jane has to learn. That's her entry point, right? I mean, she gets there and this is just Ransom saying, I don't make the rules. The Eldilla are not okay with you joining us without your husband's consent. Like this is a hierarchy from on high. This all fits within a certain myth. And I love how you now we could get into a whole nother debate about like mixed fabrics and yellow socks, but that too is for another day. And then like how the covenants relate to each other, that's just like theology nerd talk. But if you begin with the myth that and I don't even calling it a myth, I don't mean that again in any reductive sense that's going to be on the road to like a Boltmanian demythologized theology. But if we start with a mythic understanding of reality as created by God, and the creator knows the telos and the telos and the purpose and the right use of all things, then from that beginning, everything starts to fit together. But where I get in trouble is with friends who want to simultaneously say, yeah, I affirm all the traditional theology. I just reject the way it actually works out in my life. And I think that ultimately that's just the same kind of discord that Lewis is really wanting us to, he wants to highlight. He wants us to walk away from his stories reminded, no, actually, my flourishing and happiness as a creature is when I am in alignment with my creator inside of his creation. And that all starts with the myth.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Christiana, what's next in your writing pipeline? Do you have a bunch of other essays in the works coming out that we need to track?
Oh, that would be wonderful. Though maybe not right at the moment. It's a little busy wrapping up the school year, but
right.
I always, there's always ideas. I have so many ideas, but my current project, Lewis related project right now, has been ongoing. It's coming along slowly, which is actually tackling Till We Have Faces. So it's the other one that I think is somewhat underrepresented in if you go searching for books about Till We Have Faces. There's some good ones out there, but not a lot. It's not, and I think it is, and it's the other one that I've encountered many people have kind of a love it or hate it sort of attitude towards Till We Have Faces. And I do think that a large camp of the hate it people don't actually understand what Lewis was doing with it. And so that's another one that it's probably one of my favorite of Lewis's fiction books. And it's another difficult one. And so I am tackling that. I'm tackling a reader guide on Till We Have Faces. So it's in the earlier stages. I'm really hoping I have some strong goals in terms of hitting writing goals over the summer, especially, and talking to lots of people who have done some great work on it. So yeah, really excited about that when it comes to Lewis work. And I'm dabbling around in some fiction. I've actually dabbled in fiction for a long time and hoping to break area soon. So yeah, those are the current writing projects.
Well, that's very exciting to hear. In about a month, I'll be, if Lord willing, I'll be talking with Father Andrew Lazo about Till We Have Faces. And he loves that book. And he's made a bit of a splash making the claim that, like, it's always the best book. No matter which one you think is best, it's Till We Have Faces.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
maybe in a couple of years when you've got your book out and hopefully he's got his book out, we could get both of you on to either endorse each other's views or competing interpretations.
Well,
Sounds
I
great.
have talked to him. I have talked to him about it actually, and he's he's been a helpful resource actually, because he's done so much work on it. And so hopefully we won't clash on
hopefully
it too.
not. But if you do, that's just the beginning point of future scholarship.
From what I've seen, I think we're more on the same page, more in alignment than anything. So, but yeah, he's been great to talk to you about that, because he's quite the expert.
He's incredibly kind and gracious. Christiana, how can people find and follow your work online?
Yes, I do have a Facebook page, Christiana Hale author. I will be first to admit I'm not super active on it, but I do try to post updates. I also have an Instagram page as well, a little more active on that. Same handle, Christiana Hale author. My books are on Amazon or through Deeper Heaven is also available through my publisher, Roman Roads Press. They often have sales regularly, so that's a great place to go if you want to get a nice good discount at times. So but I think that's it for right now.
Awesome. Well, what Lewis lover does not also love discounts on books? I mean, that's just a great thing. Oh, thank you so much, Christiana, for coming on the show. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you. It's great.
Well, thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us here today on The Optimistic Curmudgeon. My guest has been Christiana Hale, author of Deeper Heaven and the article Enjoyment and Contemplation, The Green Lady, Self-Knowledge, and Growth in Maturity. You've been listening to another episode of The Optimistic Curmudgeon, where the best ideas win. I'm your host, Josh Herring. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, please do find and follow us on X and on YouTube. On X, you can find me as @TheOptimisticC3, and on YouTube, just search for Optimistic Curmudgeon. We want to make sure that you have the ability to find and follow all of our content. And then if you're looking at the show description, you'll see links to any resources that were referenced in the show, as well as the sponsors for this episode. Please do check those out. We are very grateful for a variety of different institutions in helping to make this show possible. Until next time, seek the good, enjoy the true, and live the beautiful.